right, this morning we're looking at Titus, so go ahead and open your Bibles to the obscure short book of Titus, but it's an important book. This is the first letter of Paul's we're looking at. As you know, we're going through a series of his letters, his first letter that he writes to an individual. And he's writing to Titus about being a leader and becoming a leader and leading this church on this island nation, island of Crete. Now, I don't know if you've ever had the thought that I am a leader. I think somewhere inside of you that is there. Maybe no one's ever told you that. But if you've had a job, anyone that's ever had a job, I know that you've had the thought, I could lead better than he is or better than she can. Am I right about? Don't raise your hand, it's rhetorical. You've all had the thought, I should be managing this department. You've all thought, I should be in charge. I should be the leader of this company. And maybe you should. And here's where I'm heading this morning. You see, I think inside of all of us, this is a key idea that I have in your handout. Inside of every person God has made there's potential for leadership. There is a leader inside of you. And maybe no one has ever shown you that. Maybe you've never discovered it. Or maybe you've been leading, but maybe you can be a better leader. I hope that by the end of this morning that you are willing to say to God, help me be a better leader. Or God, show me the areas that I can lead in your place of work, in an organization, in this church. Maybe it's in your family. The thing is, a lot of us have leadership potential inside, and often it just stays there and it doesn't come out. And we need someone else to pull it out of us, or you need to pull it out of someone else. Years ago, when I was a college pastor, I was putting a team together to go to Costa Rica, and I always asked a girl and a guy, college students, to lead with me. And so I met with this girl. She had great potential. She was a strong leader. Students looked up to her. And I said, would you lead on this trip to Costa Rica? And she said, sure, I will. And she's a hard worker. Well, then that Sunday, I saw her mom, and her mother comes to find me in the church lobby. And you can tell from a long ways off when a mother's unhappy. And she was unhappy. I was like, what did I possibly do to this family? And the mom says, did you talk to Stephanie about being a leader? I said, yes, I did. She said, why did you ask her to be a leader? And I said, because kids look up to her, and she's a hard worker, and she has great potential. And then her mother just says, well, she's not a leader. And then she walked off, and that was it. It was so weird, because who says that about your own daughter or your own son? And maybe that is somewhere inside of you, and no one has ever encouraged you to let it come out. This morning, I hope that we can. So turn to Titus. I'm going to start reading in chapter 1, verse 4. To Titus, my true son, in our common faith. I love how Paul talks to this young leader as his son. Grace and peace from God the Father and Christ Jesus our Savior. I left you on the island of Crete so you could complete our work there and appoint elders in each town as I instructed you. An elder must be well thought of for his good works. He must be faithful to his wife and his children. He must be a believer and his children must be believers who are not wild or rebellious. That's awesome. Verse 7, an elder must live a blameless life because he is God's minister. He must not be arrogant or quick-tempered, or must not love money. He must enjoy having guests in his home and must love all that is good. Underline that part. I really like that. He must love all that is good. So this morning, as we look at this, he talks about elders here, Paul does to Titus. But as you read the book of Titus, if I were to put it in a nutshell what it's all about, it's about Titus. This is how you become a leader. And there's so many leadership lessons buried in this short book. I want to pull out several of them, and hopefully you can apply them in your context, whether it's in work or in an organization or in your family or in this church. And so I've written down several leadership principles. The first one that I want to challenge you with is to say this. I want to say that leaders inspire. But I'm going to talk about this morning not just any leader. I want to talk about catalytic leaders. You see, I think there are some leaders that when they cast a vision, people will march, people follow. There are some leaders when they cast a vision, people will give their life to what their vision is about. There are some leaders that can see into the future and see how God can work through their lives or the life of a people group. And I think there's certain leaders that I would describe as catalytic leaders. And I think that can be your life. And so the first thing that I want to say is catalytic leaders inspire people. Look at verse 7 in chapter 2. Turn over one page in your Bible. Show yourself in all respects to be a model of good works, and in your teaching show integrity and dignity. But he says to this young man, Titus, he says, you can be a model to the people there. You can inspire them to do things that they never believed they could do. You see, I think everyone wants to be, I think in our human nature, every one of us wants to be a part of something that is greater than ourselves. Catalytic leaders inspire people to do that. There are some leaders that pull the best out of people that others cannot. Catalytic leaders can do that. I'll give you an example. So when I was in high school, 11th grade, I played basketball for my high school team in Jackson, Mississippi. And our first 8, I was a junior. So our first 8 games of the season, we went 0-8. I mean, it was just a goose egg. We were horrible. And our coach, he tried his best. He thought he was Bobby Knight Jr. So it was fundamentals. I thought, this is not working. But then we're 0-8 on our 9th game. It comes down to the last second of the game. We're down by 1 point, and they foul our center. So our coach calls a timeout. And then he says to our center, he says, I want you to know that I believe, not just believe, I know you're going to make these free throws. And then he said this, of anyone on the team, if I could pick one person to shoot these free throws, it would be you. And I'm like, Coach, I want to say, you're lying, Coach. This kid, he's like Shaquille O'Neal at the line. He can't hit a thing. We had 4 better shooters all around him that were starters. But he tells the kid, you're going to make these, and I believe you can. I would have chosen you. So our center goes to the line with a second left in the game, and he throws up. It's a complete brick. It hits the rim, hits the backboard. I'm not making this up. Goes around the rim, sits on the front lip of the rim. Our principal talked about it the next day. You think it's going out, and then it falls in. The crowd goes nuts. The game is tied. He buries the second one. He's a hero. We won the next 9 games and made the playoffs. I think it's because of that one free throw. So fast forward about 6-7 years, I finished college, finished grad school, went to Africa, and I was coaching the African Bible College basketball team. We're playing our crosstown rivals. There's a second left in the game. They foul my center, and we're down by 1. So I call a timeout, and I give him the B. Bailey speech. I say, Koke Koti. I said, he was my center. I said, you're going to make these. If there's anyone on the team I would pick, it would be you. And I'm like, Palmer, you're just lying. He's horrible. He's horrible at the line. Irving Mawol, if you know him, he was my best shooter. But I'm saying, I believe it. That's what B. Bailey said, Coach Bailey. So I said, you're going to make these. I know you can. You're made for this. He bricked the first one and the second one, and we lost the game. That's the end of that story. So some people can inspire people to do things that they never thought they could. Coach Bailey did. I couldn't. But catalytic leaders can cast a vision that people want to grab onto, that they'll march for. Catalytic leaders inspire people and organizations and businesses. Here's the most important thing that catalytic leaders do to inspire people who they work with. They explain to them the why. Why are we doing the things that we do? Most people who lead businesses or companies can tell you what they do. Most people can't tell you why they do it. I have a circle here, and some talk about it as the golden circle. And most companies will begin with the what. What do we make? Well, we make cars. How do we make them? In a factory. Why? To make money. That's how a lot of companies operate. They operate from the outside in, starting with what? We have a product, and we're trying to earn money with it. But the best companies, the greatest companies, the best leaders, the greatest leaders start with why are we doing this? I'll use this as an example. Maybe some of you have bought a pair of Tom's shoes. Well, Tom's starts with a why. You see, Tom says this, why do we make shoes? Because we believe that one person at a time, one pair of shoes at a time we can end extreme poverty in this world. That's their why. If you buy a pair of shoes, the how is, if you buy a pair of shoes, we're going to give it away to someone else. And we make shoes out of natural materials, no synthetic materials, and we pay people a fair wage and a livable wage. And then we end up with a great-looking pair of shoes for women. Guys wear them too, don't get me wrong, guys wear them, but a lot of women wear them. I buy them for my wife. One day I'm going to get brave enough to buy myself a pair of Toms because Seth Wells wears them. He's awesome and cool, and one day I'm going to be like that. But Toms has this great why behind what they do. Toms, when you hear their story, why are you doing it? It's not to make money. It's not for the bottom line. It's because we want to change the world. And all of a sudden, people are ready to march. So my point is, great leaders start with the why. The why is your purpose. The why is your reason for getting out of bed in the morning. The why is why people should give their lives to an organization or a business or to a church. The great leaders know their why. And so I want to challenge you. I'm going to give you a takeaway for each of these talking points this morning. And the first one is this: write down the why for what you do at your work. What is the why behind it? What is inspiring you? What is going to cause you to inspire others? All right, I'll say this next. Great leaders, catalytic leaders, I'm going to say, eat last. Now, this isn't my line. I have to tell you this. This is Simon Sinek's line. I heard Simon Sinek speak at Catalyst not long ago, and he talks about great leaders eat last. So I'm going to come back to this. Let's go to Titus chapter 1, and then I want to read from chapter 3. In chapter 1, verse 8, we read, "Live wisely and be fair." Circle that, underline that. Be wise and be fair with the people around you. Now go to chapter 3. I'm going to start reading at verse 3. "At one time we too were foolish, disobedient, deceived, and enslaved by all kinds of passions and pleasures. We lived in malice and envy, being hated and hating one another." But then he says this, underline this part, "But when the kindness and love of God, our Savior, appeared," everything changed. Circle those words. When the kindness and love of God appeared in our lives, you become better leaders. In the business culture in our country, we don't talk much about kindness and love, do we? Those are not business principles. I don't have an MBA, but I don't think we teach classes on kindness and love. But people that know great leaders and catalytic leaders will always say that the best leaders, the thing that keeps people following them and believing in them is their kindness and their love. The same things that Paul talks about here. Do you know what bad leaders think motivate people? Intimidation and threats. Have you ever worked for someone who the only way they can make anything happen at work was by intimidating people and threatening to fire people? And that might motivate you for a day, but not for a year, not for a lifetime. The best leaders know that if you are gracious and kind to the people you're surrounded by, then they follow you. And so Simon Sinek, this is the title of his book, Leaders Eat Last. He talks about, he was a Marine, but then he spent time with Marines in Afghanistan just as a writer. And he said that he observed one company was in the mess tent having their food, and he said the officers were standing there waiting for all of the soldiers to go through and get their food. These are Marines. And so finally, when it was the officer's turn to go through the line, the food was gone. He said, so they went out in the field. The officer, this captain, had not eaten. He said, but when they got in the field, he noticed that all the guys in his platoon had brought him a portion of their meal so that he had more than enough to eat. Leaders eat last. He asked this one general, General Flynn, he said, I know that Marines are great. We all know Marines are great, right? He says, but General Flynn, why would you say Marines are great? And General Flynn says, because officers eat last. And think about that. In our business culture, in most workplaces or organizations, you're taught to put yourself first. If there's a project, you better take credit or someone else is going to get the raise or the promotion. But great leaders don't take all the credit. Great leaders share the credit around. Great leaders eat last. Great leaders, catalytic leaders, are not takers. They share and they give. And as Paul, we'll use Paul's words, they are kind and gracious, and the love of God fills their lives. So let's go back to chapter 3, verse 1. We read, Paul says this, be ready to do whatever is good. I love that line. To slander no one. Be peaceable and considerate, and always be gentle towards everyone. What kind of leadership qualities are those? Those are the qualities of great leaders. If you think intimidation and threatening people works, then you're just learning. You're behind the curve. And then he goes on, verse 10, so go down chapter 3, verse 10, because he says there's some people, he uses the word divisive. Don't raise your hand, but haven't most of us worked with people that in every meeting, they cause confusion. Every email, there's conflict. Every phone call, it's trouble. And he says this about these people. He says, verse 10, warn divisive people once, then warn them a second time, and then have nothing to do with them. Divisive people erode two critical things. They erode collaboration, and they erode trust. If there's two critical things that catalytic leaders know that they need to earn the trust and the loyalty of people around them, is they must build trust, they must collaborate, they must have an environment where you can work together. Great leaders make you feel safe. Think about that. Have you ever worked in a place where you never felt safe? You always felt like you were on the verge of being fired or having someone yell at you or reprimand you. But great leaders, they ooze this confidence and they make people around them feel safe and that it's okay. I'll share one more Marine story. So there's a Captain William Swenson who in 2009, he was given the Congressional Medal of Honor because Captain William Swenson was in Afghanistan, and he got caught in a gunfight, and the soldiers around him were going down. And he saw some of them were wounded and still alive, and so he started to grab them, and a chopper landed with medics, and he ran and hauled them on his shoulder to the chopper and would drop them in one after another. 5. He saved 5 guys' lives. And then one of the medics, true story, is in the chopper, and he has a GoPro on his helmet, and he's recording this captain coming back over and over. And the last guy that he lays down in the chopper, this captain leans over, and he kisses him on the cheek like he would a brother. And then he runs back to find somebody else who needs help. Well, they ask him later, Captain Swenson, why did you keep going back into the firefight to rescue these guys? You could have been killed yourself. Do you know what his answer was? He said this, they would have done the same thing for me. He knew without a doubt, they would have done the same thing for me. Where do people like Captain Swenson come from? Wouldn't you love to work under someone like Captain Swenson? How come we don't have people like that in most of our workplaces? You know, when you're down and hurt, they're stabbing you in the back. You fire him, let him go. He's underproducing. Or she is. We say things like that. And we might think, well, maybe this is a rare quality. Maybe he's an outlier. And no, do you know what the one factor is? Because every Marine says that. Every Marine will say, he or she would have done the same thing for me. The difference is the environment that they work in. In their environment, there's trust and there's collaboration. You have to work together, and then you trust the person to your right and your left, and you take care of them. And if you want to be a great leader, if you aspire to lead in any capacity, then make sure you're taking care of the people to your right and to your left. Great leaders are not takers. Great leaders don't eat first. Great leaders eat last. They create an environment, a culture of safety. Think about it with kids. Do you know what they say the best discipline with kids is? The best discipline with kids is not to yell at them. The best discipline isn't to give them timeouts. I'm not saying don't discipline, so don't leave here and misquote me, parents. The best form of discipline is to love your kids And the longer the more you love them, and the longer this goes on, the more they become obedient to you because they love you back. You can threaten and yell at them in a loud voice, but that just gets the dishes done once. That doesn't make it happen for, till they graduate from high school. There's an entrepreneur in New York. His name is Charlie Kim, and Charlie Kim started a tech company called Next Jump. And Charlie Kim promises his employees and the world that he's going to change the way employees are treated. Charlie Kim says this. He says, think about this. He said, if you owned a company and all of your employees were your relatives, were your family members, your brothers and your sisters and your uncles and aunts, if things got tough financially, would you start to fire your own relatives? Now, a lot of you are going to say, yes, I would fire my brother-in-law right away. First one, he's down. No, but how many of you, to make your bottom line, would fire a son or a daughter? We wouldn't. We would sacrifice the bottom line before we sacrificed one of our employees if they're our children. And so Charlie Kim says, at Next Jump, everyone we hire is like a member of our family. And if someone is underperforming, he says, no one ever gets fired for lack of performance. We start to coach them more, and we help them succeed. We put someone next to them who can show them how to do their job better. But we don't start firing people. Great leaders would never sacrifice people to save the numbers. They would sacrifice the numbers before they sacrifice people. Think about this with me. At the top of some organizations are people who are in charge. They have all the authority, and so you obey them, right? You do what they ask. But you would never follow them. There are some people, though, that are at the bottom of the organizational chart. They have no authority, but people follow them. Do you know why? Because they've been taking care of the person to their right and to their left. And if there's one thing that will change the way you lead, one factor, it's you starting to use what Paul says here, show kindness and love to the person to your right and the person to your left, and that starts to change everything. Great leaders, catalytic leaders, eat last. All right, let's go back to where we were in Titus. And the next thing that I want to say is catalytic leaders boldly innovate. And so in chapter 2, we read in verse 15, you must teach these things and encourage the believers to do them. You have the authority. He says, people are going to disagree with you. He says, but that's okay. What you're doing needs to be done. Now, what Paul is asking of a very young leader in Titus is really tough. He says, you're going to face opposition, and you're going to not want to follow through on these things. But Paul is saying, be courageous, be bold, be fearless. People will oppose you, but what we're doing needs to happen because of this principle. Great leaders change the status quo. You see, if someone is put in a leadership position and nothing is changing, then they're just managing. And I hate to say this, that managers are not always leaders. Managers just manage what's happening. Leaders do new things. Leaders change things for the better. Leaders are asking, how can we innovate? How can we do this better? What is something new we can try? Because it might change the world. And so catalytic leaders, I'm going to stop saying that word. Keep asking that question, how can we innovate? How can we be creative? And it's frightening. Here's the thing. If you are afraid of risk, you can't lead. Great leaders know that there's always the price of risk, that things might go bad, but they're willing to take the risk. If you refuse to do something that scares you, you can't lead. It's not that great leaders aren't afraid. They just move forward in spite of the fear that they're feeling on the inside. I said great leaders are bold innovators. They find new ways to do things. I was trying to think of an example to share with you, and there's dozens that came to mind, but I want to tell you about my twin brother, Paul. He's lived in Malawi, East Africa for about 20 years. And it started to really bother Paul recently that most of the forest in Malawi has been slashed and burned. They use the wood for firewood. Almost every village, the only form of fuel they have to cook their ufa, their sima at night, their maize, is a wood fire. And so as you drive along the roads of Malawi, you see bags of charcoal on the road. We have a picture here. And these bags of charcoal, he said he's driving down. He said he was probably half an hour outside the capital city of about 1 million people. And he said he saw these bags of charcoal line the road for over 1 kilometer. And so he stopped and he asked the people selling the charcoal, he said, where is all of this charcoal going? You know, are they exporting it to Zimbabwe or something? And the people said, no, it's all going to Lilongwe. And they said it would all be gone by the next day. 1 kilometer of charcoal, that's all trees that have been burned to charcoal. And so it bothered him so much that he says, I've got to find a way to change this, all right? And then he also noticed that after the harvesting season, in every village, as far as you could see, there were clouds of smoke going up. Because after they harvest the corn, it's their primary staple, they take the husk, and there's this giant husk outside of every village, and they burn it. They just burn it because if they leave it there, it'll fill with rats and snakes. And so Paul had this idea. He thought, what if we take this discarded waste of corn husk, and we ground it up? And he found a grinder that could do it. And then he said, what if we made briquettes out of these, and then let people cook their food over these briquettes? I have a picture of the briquettes. Or let's go to the machine. So he had a welder on our college campus over there make this big contraption, and he has all these pods at the end of it, and they put the corn husk down in there after soaking them overnight, and then they smash them with that, and they produce, I think, like a dozen at a time with his machine there. He's not an engineer. He's just a school professor and a college president, and then they end up with these briquettes. And then they've given them to the women. The women say they burn hotter and last longer than the charcoal. And so now he's going to try to start producing these to line the roads with waste, things people were just burning instead of cutting down trees. So do you see the innovation in that? My point is, you have those kinds of ideas. And maybe you're not acting on it. I think there's this God-given ability in all of us to do something new, to create. I have a list here of 3 times, and this list could be a lot longer, when every leader needs courage. We need the courage to say no. You know what's easy as a leader? When someone comes to you with a great idea, you go, bingo, let's do it. But what if someone you value comes to you with a really bad idea? That's the hard one. Great leaders need the courage to dream and to be bold and do that. Great leaders need the courage to do something new, to innovate. And so I challenge you with that. And here's the final thought that I want to leave with you this morning is leaders are doers. And I have next to this chapter 3, verse 1. And we read, be ready to do whatever is good. And it's just one short sentence here, but I want you to circle the word do in chapter 3, verse 1. Be ready to do whatever is good. That do to me is so important because some people, and maybe you know them, are just talkers. Some people spend hours and hours and days over lattes with friends in coffee shops talking about great ideas, but they never do anything. And some people are doers. They say this, hire doers. If you're ever in charge of hiring, hire doers. You can rent talkers. You can just bring in someone part-time to do that, but you want doers. And if you're thinking about leading in any capacity, start somewhere small. Maybe you aren't sure yet. Start small and then watch God grow that. And maybe as we're talking this morning, you know on the inside you have not been the leader that your family needs. Can I challenge you to become a godly Christian leader in your home? Maybe in your workplace, you have not been the godly leader that you know you can be. Can I challenge you in your workplace to be a godly leader? In this church, we need your help. Contact Jennifer Bellinger or Josh Havens or any of our staff in our children's ministry, art ministry, music ministry, if you have a desire and you aspire to lead, we need you leading here. We need more leaders. If you can teach and lead a small group, see Scott Swanson. If you can help with our local and global work, see Paul Gunther or Melinda Gunther. We need you leading here. God has gifted you. Don't let it waste.